The first artist is one you may not know is in the Parrish Permanent Collection. His art hasn't been seen on view recently. And the other artist you will have seen recently because he was featured in Roadshow and worked with us in education. But this piece is by Romare Bearden, and he was born in 1911 in North Carolina. And he's really one of the most esteemed artists of the 20th century. He's well known for his work in collage, and his works are in major museums around the country. So you're likely to have seen them hanging in major museums around the country. This piece is called Tidings. It's a silkscreen from the 1970s, and it came into the Parrish's collection in 1980. And it contains a lot of elements that are major themes in Romare Bearden's work. One is the train, or the idea of journeying. And I mentioned that Bearden was born in North Carolina. As a toddler, his family moved to New York, where they lived in Harlem. And many of the Harlem Renaissance writers and artists visited his home frequently. So he was surrounded by innovative art, music, and writers. And the train is a very weighted symbol in his work. It relates to his childhood memories. While living in Harlem, he often went back to visit his paternal grandmother, who was still living in North Carolina, so he'd spend summers there. And they lived just in the area where several different rail lines converged. So trains were a constant. The train whistle was a constant. It marked time, the time to begin and end work, time passing throughout the day. And he spoke about that his grandmother never missed waving to the train, whether she was in the house waving a towel out the window or tending the garden, she'd stop and wave her apron. And that was a very distinct memory of his childhood. The train also represents important elements in African American culture, the Underground Railroad and the Great Migration, which of course was part of Bearden's own life experience. And they also represented the idea of being separated from beloved family, which was also part of his personal experience, given that one set of grandparents were in North Carolina, he and his immediate family were in Harlem, and his other set of grandparents were in Pittsburgh. So he spent his childhood traveling between those areas to connect with family members. Another element in the work that you'll see in many of Bearden's work are female figures, and female figures that are shown tending gardens or caring for young. And those figures, their faces and their hands are often made with different papers, textured papers that make them stand out and bring attention to them. So the hands are often large, and they also relate to tending gardens or fields or caring for the young or work in general. Rural shacks appear often, and hills and roads, and those, as you can see here, are often made with different textured papers. So he would use magazine cutouts, wallpaper, hand-painted papers, and sometimes fabric or even material samples like tile or countertop samples. Now, this work hasn't been shown much at the Parrish because Romare Bearden didn't live or work on the East End of Long Island, but I think his themes have relevance to the East End story. The Great Migration had its impact on the East End of Long Island because many families, the history of the Great Migration is often told that African Americans migrated from the South to the northern urban centers for work, but many also came to rural communities for opportunities, and that's true of the East End. Wendy referred to the Dan Flavin work, which is installed in actually the first location of the First Baptist Church of Bridgehampton. So communities, established churches, and businesses, and all of this history is going to be told in the East End African American Museum, which is going to open in Southampton later this year. There also is the element in this work and in many of Bearden's works of the sense of place. Now, he has a fascinating biography. He served in World War II. He studied in Paris. He lived in St. Martin. And many of his works have elements of sense of place from all of those experiences. And that relates to the sense of place we see in many East End landscapes. Before I go on to the next, I just want to mention the technique, because Bearden, as I said, was known for collage, but he often used photographic techniques and print techniques to rework his collages and explore changes in scale or changes in color. In this case, he'd use a photostatic camera and make an image of the collage, and then work with a master printer to create plates or screens for each colors. He worked extensively with Robert Blackburn, who's a printmaker who operated a studio in Chelsea for more than 55 years. So once you know that each color in a print is a separate screen, you can start to get a sense of the choices the artist could make by changing colors. So if you look at things like the yellow and the orange in particular, how they appear in different parts of the work, you could think about how changing out those colors was a way for Bearden to experiment with the effect. So there's another piece in the Parrish collection. Oh, this is an image of him at work in his studio with a picture of his paternal grandparents right there next to the table. And this other piece from the Parrish collection, it's called Before the First Whistle. It's a lithograph from 1974. So it's a similar technique, beginning with a collage, a handmade collage, and then exploring that as a print. And you can see how this relates back to many of the themes I mentioned. It's called The First Whistle, which refers to the train whistle and a couple rising for work before that first whistle, which would certainly be before dawn. So you can see them lighting a lantern. You can see how the faces and particularly the hands of the male figure are treated differently to make them stand out. It's a very touching and tender image between the couple, and also with this beautiful little dog in the corner. So as I mentioned, Bearden has a fascinating biography, and he was also well known for his advocacy for African American art, his activism in the civil rights movement. So I'd encourage you looking more into his work, and when you're able to visit museums again, looking for his work. So I'm going to switch gears to the photographer Jeremy Dennis, who was born in 1990. So he's very much an artist of the 21st century. But his work incorporates traditional legends and stories that he remembers hearing as a child. He's a member of the Shinnecock Indian Nation. And the two works that are in the Parrish collection are from his story series, which were included in this roadshow exhibition in 2018 at Duck Creek in the John Little Barn. And that's an image of the artist while we were working on that installation. This piece is called The Stone Coats, and it represents an Iroquois legend that was explaining the presence of large rock cliffs. And in the story, they were once giants who roamed the earth and then became frozen in place. And what's really fascinating about Jeremy Dennis's technique is he uses digital photography and then software to manipulate the image. But in this story series, often he's using his own image. So both of the giants actually are images of the artist himself, which he then manipulated by layering on images of stone cliffs and images of vegetation. This other piece from the series is called The Internment of Pagada Cut. It's from 2017. And this depicts a historic event, which was the movement of the Sacrum Pagada Cut from Shelter Island to Montauk for his burial. The event occurred in 1651. And again, Jeremy Dennis uses himself as a model. And every one of the figures is an image that he took of himself using, holding a light from various angles to get that sense of figures lighted by the torches. And even the figure of Pagada Cut, who was an older man, what Jeremy did was blend his own image with one of his elders' from the Shinnecock Nation to kind of age himself. But just a few images that relate to Jeremy Dennis's work. He has many different series and many different projects where he's exploring Native American issues related to identity and assimilation and history. And one of his projects is this website on this site. And here you'll see he's identified sites important to Indigenous history right here on the East End. And this one, Sacrum Hole, is the spot where this procession to carry Pagada Cut from Shelter Island to Montauk stopped, and the ceremony that's depicted in his image was held. So this is a site you can visit. You'll see at the top, jeremynative.com is his website. On this site is this project. And this is an image of the landmark you can see there. The site is along 114. If you're heading north, you can keep a lookout for this. And I just want to mention he has a lot of different series in his work. The Stories is one of them, and others where he stages moments. And he's featured in the online exhibition that just opened at the museum this week. It was intended to be shown at the Parrish starting May the 3rd, but was transferred into an online exhibition. So I encourage you to have a look at that. And on Friday evening this week at 5 o'clock, he's giving the Friday Night Live talk. So I encourage you to tune into that and hear directly from the artist. So that concludes my portion of the talk, and I don't see any other comments that have come up. But as of now, if you'd like to share something or ask something, you actually can, anyone participating can unmute themselves. And I'm going to unmute Wendy for a minute and thank her.
You're welcome. Thank you, Kara.